Most people focus on the moment documentation is completed. The policy gets written, the procedures get approved, the checklist is finalized, the compliance file is uploaded. But the real story doesn't start there. It starts the day after. Today, we're looking at what really happens after documentation is created. When attention fades, reality sets in, and long-term consequences quietly begin. In services, documentation feels like closure. In reality, it's only the beginning. Let's start with the moment everyone remembers. The document is finalized, leadership signs off, a new policy is introduced, an audit file is completed, a governance manual is updated. At the time, it feels responsible, structured, professional. There's relief. We're compliant now. We have it documented. We're protected. If something happens, we can show this. And at that moment, that belief makes sense. Documentation creates psychological safety. It feels like control, key framing. At the time, this decision made sense. And often it still does, but documentation is not protection, it's potential protection. The day after, things still look fine. The document exists, the process manual is shared, the training slides are distributed, the governance file is archived, operations continue. There are even small wins. Teams feel structured, auditors feel reassured, managers feel covered, clients feel confident. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses. In fact, documentation often creates a short-term boost in confidence. And that's important, because that early calm is exactly why problems go unnoticed. Tone here is calm and observational. No one did anything wrong. They did what organizations are trained to do. They documented. This is where the invisible shifts begin. Documentation changes behavior, but not always in the way people expect. Subtle shifts start happening. Ownership diffuses. It's in the document, slowly replaces "I understand the process." Processes become rigid. Teams follow the wording instead of the intent. Updates slow down because changing documentation feels heavy and bureaucratic. Real-world drift begins. Operations evolve. The document doesn't. False confidence grows. "We're covered" becomes "we're safe." Small compromises appear. Minor exceptions not reflected in writing. Temporary workarounds that become permanent. Responsibilities that shift informally. No single change looks dangerous. But together, they create divergence between what is documented and what is actually happening. This is the core invisible risk in services. Documentation freezes reality, but operations never stand still. The consequences don't arrive loudly, they arrive slowly. Months later, something happens. An audit question reveals inconsistency. A client escalation exposes unclear accountability. A regulatory review finds outdated procedures. A service failure highlights undocumented deviations. And suddenly it feels like, how did we miss this? But nothing broke overnight. The gap formed gradually. Small deviations, untracked changes, assumptions layered on top of assumptions. What feels sudden is often the result of compounding drift, process misalignment, documentation aging silently. Documentation doesn't fail dramatically, it expires quietly. Most people don't ignore problems, they simply don't see them yet. There are powerful human and organizational reasons. Cognitive bias. If the document exists, we assume control exists. 2. Overconfidence. We've done this for years. 3. Process blindness. When documentation becomes routine, it stops being questioned. 4. Emotional investment. Teams worked hard to create it. No one wants to admit it may already be outdated. 5. Organizational inertia. Updating documentation feels like effort with no visible reward, so drift continues, unnoticed. This isn't incompetence, it's human nature, and it's extremely common across industries. People with experience don't judge documentation by the moment it's written. They judge it by what happens after. Professionals ask different questions. Is this document alive? Who updates it? When was it last stress tested? Does it reflect how we actually operate? What changed in the business that this doesn't yet capture? They monitor signals, increased exceptions, informal shortcuts. We usually just conversations, repeated clarifications around the same process, Experienced operators expect behavior to change after documentation, because documentation influences incentives, and incentives shape action. They don't just create documents, they design documentation ecosystems, version control, ownership mapping, update triggers, review cycles, feedback loops. They understand documentation is not a static shield, it's a living control system. The lesson isn't don't document, the lesson is plan for the day after. Here's the mindset shift. Instead of asking, is this documented? Ask, how will this stay accurate over time? One framing principle, documentation without evolution creates risk. One long-term question to ask yourself, if our operations change tomorrow, how quickly would our documentation reflect that? That single question changes everything. Most documentation doesn't fail at the moment it's written. It fails in the days, weeks, and months that follow. If this changed how you think about documentation, that's the goal. Because in services, structure isn't created when something is written. It's created when something is maintained. This is the day after. And next week, we'll explore what happens after service standardization. Until then, stay structured, stay observant, and never stop reviewing what you believe protects you.